Welcome, everyone. All right, we've got folks coming in pretty quickly here, so we're just going to continue to welcome everyone to this Zoom space. If you just give us a few moments. Okay, good to see everybody's faces. And we will ask you if you're able to make sure that your video is on. It just allows us to create a little bit more of an intimate community, although we are virtual, if we can see one another's faces. So if you're able to, please have your video on. We're just going to get started in another moment or two. We're going to wait to let everybody get into the space. But thank you for being with us.
What a nice turnout. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Absolutely. I'm doing the booster shot arm roll in an attempt to minimize the pain in my shoulder, if anybody's wondering.
If you feel better, we can all do this. So
yeah, I mean, feel free to join me if you need to. All right, we still got some folks coming in, so let's just give it one more minute. All right, well, Renee, I'm happy to continue to admit folks if you want to get us started.
Okay, I just wanted to thank everyone that's taking the time to do this and thank my partners in this effort, Judy Sachs and Kitty Calhoun, Rabbi Rice, Avi, Irwin, and Dawn Diener. We're thrilled to have you. We may worship in different locations, but what we're finding when it comes to social justice issues, we work really well together as a community. And I'm going to turn this over to Irwin. We have no less than 3 or 4 attorneys on this call. So I'm going to let you take it from here. But thank you so much, my partners in this effort.
Thank you, Renee.
Good afternoon, everybody, and really happy to see you all. About 10 years ago, the Temple sponsored a reading of Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow. And that set me on a path to focus more on mass incarceration and criminal justice issues than I've done before. In 2014, a group of us sponsored candidate forums for district attorney, for juvenile court judge, and for some of the judge seats. And we found those to be very, very helpful. In 2022, all 11 general sessions judges and all 6 criminal court judges will come up for election. And one thing that impacted many of us is the impact that these judges have on mass incarceration issues in Davidson County. So we are really pleased today to have Dawn Diener with us. Dawn is currently the executive director of the Choosing Justice Initiative. She formerly was the elected public defender for Davidson County for 10 years. And before that, worked as an assistant public defender in that office. She's very knowledgeable about criminal justice issues in Davidson County. And the purpose of her talk is to educate all of us about how our criminal court and general sessions criminal court systems operate in Davidson County. So Dawn, pleased to have you, and thank you very much for being with us.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here and to talk with all of you today. I am going to hopefully be able to share my screen with you and use this PowerPoint program. Okay, go ahead and give that a try. All right, there we go. So I'm going to talk to you today about the Nashville criminal courts in the 2022 judicial elections. My hope and expectation is for this to be educational. We're not going to talk about any particular judges or any particular candidates. It's really just an explanation, an overview of how things work, and hopefully to give you some background information to prepare yourself for asking smart questions and navigating the candidates who you will hear about and figuring out who it is that you want to support and vote for in the upcoming elections next year. So with that, what I want to say a little bit first is that what I'm going to talk about is the courts in theory and then the courts in reality. I'm going to hopefully give you a little bit about both of them. The truth is that all of the courts in Tennessee follow the same laws, they follow the same rules, they follow the same procedures. And so ostensibly you would think they all work the same. The reality is that the courts are very, very, very much influenced by the people who work in them. And so when we talk about the court system, when I talk about the court system, there's a system to it. There are rules that everybody's supposed to follow and laws, et cetera. But as anything in life, it is the people who work in that system who have the most influence and who shape the way things actually work. So I hope to give you an overview of the general guidelines and then how do those people shape things. So I want to start with basically the big picture. When we talk about the criminal justice system, and I call it the criminal legal system, I can explain why later if anybody's interested, but when we talk about the criminal legal system, there's a general structure to it. And this diagram, I think, does a good job of explaining how it works here in Tennessee. So it starts with the legislature that passes criminal laws. That's what we all rely on. The legislature decides what's a crime. They decide what the punishment or potential punishment is for that crime. And then prosecutors and defense lawyers and judges go about applying those things. Okay, so I think it's important for all of us to keep in mind who are the people who are in the legislature. And because that's important to understanding what they decide to call a crime. So somebody who owns a store may very well not want people shoplifting from their store, and so theft becomes a crime. Somebody who is poor and homeless and doesn't know where their next meal is coming from may need food and may feel like their only option is to get it from somewhere because they don't have the money to pay for it. They may not think that it should be a crime for somebody who has no money and no resources to get food to sustain him or herself from where they need to be. But it is the people in the legislature who write the laws and decide the punishment. So once they pass those laws, it then goes on to police who make the arrest, right? So that's the front lines of who actually gets funneled into the criminal legal system, right? And it really is kind of a funnel. You've got this big universe of what are all the laws, and then it funnels down a little bit to, well, which laws do the police really proactively enforce? Who do they arrest? And I think a good example of that, for instance, in Nashville is around driver's license cases, right? And we could talk a little bit about that, but are police actively stopping cars and citing people for driving on a suspended license, or are they not? Are they enforcing COVID mandates, mask mandates, or are they not? Are they enforcing container laws, or are they not? Are they enforcing wage theft against corporations, or are they not? These are all of the questions that get asked around, well, once we have the laws, then who gets arrested and charged? Are they patrolling Vanderbilt University's campus to see who's smoking weed? Or are they patrolling James Casey homes to see who's smoking weed? And how does that affect who then winds up in the top of this triangle, which is representative of the court system? So we basically have three levels of courts in our criminal legal system in Tennessee. You have general sessions courts, criminal courts, and then appeals. And I've represented it this way because it really represents where the number of cases are. And I'll talk a little bit about that in later on. And then off to the side, I've got juvenile courts, because there are a small number of young people who are transferred into the adult court criminal legal system every year in Tennessee, and that includes in Davidson County. So it's off to the side, and only a really tiny number fortunately, of young people get funneled into the criminal legal system for adults. We'll talk about that later. So the next thing I want to do is basically help you to understand a little bit about what you see in a criminal courtroom if you were to go into a courtroom anywhere in the state or in Nashville. And what I'm describing here is pretty much representative of who you would find in a courtroom if you were in a general sessions courtroom, if you were in a criminal courtroom, or if you were in a juvenile court. If we were in criminal court, there would actually be a jury box off to the side, because that's where jury trials are held. And so there's many, many actors within a courtroom. And here in that, so you've got the judge, you've got a district attorney, you have defense attorneys. You're also, if you're in a courtroom in Nashville, you will see witnesses who are there to testify. You will see victims or people who've been harmed. You will see defendants, people who are charged with crimes. And then you will see other courtroom staff, for instance, court officers who work for the judge, clerks who work for the elected criminal court clerk in Davidson County. If you're in a courtroom where people are in custody, you will see sheriff's deputies who are there to, bring people in from the jail. So you're going to see this broad range of people. And I think the other thing I would say is that if you were going into a courtroom in Davidson County, the odds are if you worked in that courtroom, you would know exactly what was going on and who everybody was. If you don't work in that courtroom, when you walk in, you will not know who anybody is, and you will not understand what is happening at all. So this is just a generic idea of what it looks like. And then what I'm going to talk and focus on today largely are explaining prosecutors and defense lawyers, and then the judge, and focusing on the judge since the topic of this was judicial elections. So first of all, let me start with who these judges are. So in Davidson County, at that big bottom yellow part of the triangle, we have general sessions judges, and we have 11 of them in Davidson County. They have civil and criminal jurisdiction. So they actually hear both criminal and civil cases. They also supervise what are called magistrates who work at what we've called night court, but it runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It's the place where people go when they first get arrested to see a magistrate who decides if there's probable cause to believe that they committed a crime and a warrant should be issued, and who also sets bail and conditions of release initially. So you have 11 of those judges, and they supervise 5 full-time magistrates, and then probably between 10 and 15 part-time magistrates. And so magistrate is just a kind of a fancy word for a judge. They aren't elected judges though. And so that's why they're not called judges. They are appointed and chosen by those general sessions judges, and that's who they report to. When you work your way up the triangle, you next get to criminal court. And we'll talk in a minute about what the distinctions are between each level. But when you get to criminal court, we have 6 criminal court judges. And criminal court is the place where jury trials happen. It is where more serious criminal cases are generally handled. And then we also have one juvenile court judge in Davidson County, Sheila Calloway. Most people don't know this, but she supervises 9 full-time magistrates who work within juvenile court, who conduct all kinds of hearings in her courtroom, under the auspices of juvenile court. And then as an aside, I just want people to know, as the election cycle comes up, you will also hear about circuit court judges and chancellors who are also up for re-election. We have 8 circuit court judges who handle civil cases and 3 chancellors. All of them are up for re-election as well. So these judges all serve 8-year terms of office, and the roles and responsibilities, the primary roles and responsibilities that I would say judges have fall into these 3 categories. They are basically administrators of court business, and they have administrative obligations and responsibilities. Then they're neutral and fair deciders. And this is kind of like what I think most people think about judges are doing. It's about a judge sitting on a bench and making decisions and ruling over cases. So I would categorize that as serving as a neutral and fair decider. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And then lastly, I would say judges are public servants. And I put this in here because I think that it is one of the most important things for us to remember, and frankly, for judges to remember sometimes. The position of judge is a very powerful position. And that has to be balanced against the fact that that power is given in the capacity that they serve the public. And it can be easy, I think, when people take over positions of power to sometimes lose sight of the fact that they are there to serve the public. And what does that mean? How do they balance the power that they hold with the obligation to serve the public who they're elected to serve? So that's sort of who we have here. And then let's move on to the district attorney. The district attorney is also elected and is up for re-election. They also serve 8-year terms. And the district attorney hires lawyers who serve in the role of assistant district attorney, who basically they're lawyers who stand in the place of the elected official. The DA's office also has investigators and victim witness coordinators and legal assistants and other staff who operate and run the work of that office. The roles and responsibilities of a district attorney, I took this quote right out of the Tennessee Rules of Professional Conduct, which say a prosecutor is a minister of justice whose duty is to seek justice. That's a little different than what a defense lawyer does. And it's really lofty and it sounds like really noble. And that's really what the job of a district attorney is. It is to zealously pursue prosecution of people who they believe have committed a crime, but is also to protect innocent people and not to pursue charges against somebody who they believe they don't have evidence sufficient to say they've committed a crime. So their role is really about promoting fairness and truth, acting without bias. In how they fill that role though, right, they have a lot of power as well. They establish the priorities and policies for local criminal prosecutions in the state court system, as well as in general sessions court. Everything about what gets prosecuted within the criminal legal system is decided by the district attorney's office. They are involved with every single criminal case in the district. They are involved in every single criminal investigation, potentially, about whether or not to bring a charge. And I would describe them as the most powerful person in the court system. And the reason I say that is because they have complete discretion over whether or not to prosecute a case. So when Glenn Funk, a few years ago, decided he was not going to prosecute driving on a suspended license, or a large group of them, because he perceived them as crimes of poverty, he's using his power and his discretion to say, I'm not going to devote my resources that we have to prosecuting these cases. And he's the only one in the system who can do that. He also, the DEA, also has complete discretion on how to prosecute a case. For instance, what charges to bring. I've had clients who would be charged with aggravated assault, and then I turn around and when they get indicted, the district attorney's office had decided to pursue an attempted first-degree murder charge, right? So those decisions come at the discretion of the district attorney. They also have near complete discretion on how to settle a case. So, or whether to settle a case. And when I say near complete, a judge does have the authority to reject a plea bargain offer. And so I've had that happen before where I would negotiate an agreement with the DA for my client's case, and we get in front of the judge, and the judge says, I will not accept it. So they don't have complete discretion there. If a judge rejects a plea offer, then they have to then decide what they want to do, renegotiate, dismiss the case, or whatever, something in between. But I cannot understate how much power district attorneys have in how our criminal legal system operates. On the other side of things, there are defense lawyers. And I would say that as powerful as district attorneys are and as powerful as judges are, defense attorneys hold a lot of power as well. And the power that they hold in particular is the power to impact their clients' lives dramatically. A DA has all the power in the world to dismiss my client's case, but if I never ask as a defense lawyer, the DA to dismiss my client's case, it won't happen. Defense lawyers are really the voice for the people that they represent. They are the advocates, and that is their primary responsibility, to zealously advocate for their client's goals. So zealous advocacy as a lawyer basically involves three things. It's investigating and researching the evidence, the case, the law. It's developing a relationship with your client so that you communicate with them, educate them about what their options are, and offer them advice on how to handle their situation. And then it is advocating for them. It might be filing motions to get a bond reduction, or file a motion to keep the state from using evidence that the police illegally seized, or arguing that a law is illegal and therefore shouldn't be enforced. It's really about asserting and protecting your client. You also negotiate with the DA. And then if you can't reach agreements, or if you have disputes, that's when you take the case into court and you let the judge decide. And the reason that I say defense lawyers are so powerful is because without effective representation, a defendant in a criminal case really is without any defense, any weapons whatsoever to defend themselves. They are lost and will go through a system without where everybody else knows the rules and knows how it works, and they don't. So you can have the best DA under the sun, but if the defense lawyer isn't communicating the information to the DA that needs to be communicated to convince the DA to dismiss your client's case, then that DA doesn't do you any good. There are three different types of defense counsel. There's paid private defense lawyer. So I can go hire a lawyer if I get arrested and charged with a crime. If I can't afford to hire a lawyer, then the first option for me is the public defender. And in Nashville, the public defenders are elected and serve 4-year terms, different than everybody else. In other places in Tennessee, they serve 8-year terms, but in Nashville, it's 4. And then the last one is court-appointed counsel. And that system comes into play when the public defender can't take the case for many reasons. And that's a good number of cases. I would say close to as many individuals in Davidson County receive court-appointed counsel defenders who represent them. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So I want to talk a little bit about those 3 levels of court in that triangle, right? And then off to the side. General Sessions Court is really the place, the most number of judges, we have 11 of them. It is a high volume court. It is the place where you first go if you have been arrested, typically speaking. There's everything I'm saying here is generalities, but for the vast majority of people, if you get arrested, you will first go to see the magistrate, who will decide whether or not there's a warrant that should issue and what your conditions of release should be. And within a day or 2 of seeing that magistrate, you will be in General Sessions Court. The majority of cases that are handled in General Sessions Court are misdemeanors. So a misdemeanor is something that carries less than a year in jail. Felony cases that carry, or offenses that carry more than a year in jail if you are convicted, also start out there. But the only thing judges are really doing on those cases in general sessions court is deciding if there's probable cause and if the case should go to the grand jury, and they will review bail. So here in general sessions court, and just to kind of give you a little bit of perspective, in general sessions court in 2019, they handled 24,860 cases where people had been arrested, physically brought into custody, and a little over 12,000 citations. So people can be arrested physically, but for misdemeanors, if the police don't want to arrest you and bring you downtown, they can give you a citation, and that brings you to general sessions court. So that's 36,000 cases in 2019. And that is actually about half of what it was in the year that we had the most cases going through general sessions court, which was back in 2005. In 2005, we had over 70,000 cases that went through our general sessions court. It's just criminal cases, not even counting civil, traffic, environmental, and all of that. So it's a very high volume court. Judges there, these 11 general sessions judges that we're talking about, they do a wide range of things. They do a lot of accepting guilty pleas, right? So most cases are resolved by an agreement between the defendant and the state. And so those judges take those guilty pleas, they accept them, and put the person through the paces of having to do that. They also can conduct bench trials. So if I'm in general sessions court charged with a misdemeanor and I'm not guilty, and I want a judge to decide whether or not the state can prove that I'm guilty, and I want a trial, I can do that in general sessions court. I can waive my right to a jury trial, and the judge sitting there can decide if I'm guilty or not guilty based on the proof. They also conduct preliminary hearings. So that's just a hearing where the judge is deciding, is there enough evidence to believe that there's probable cause that the person committed the charge that they're charged with. If there's probable cause, then the judge is going to send the case to the grand jury, and the case will then proceed on into criminal court, most likely. And then there's probation violations that general sessions courts handle. So if I plead guilty in general sessions court to a misdemeanor and I'm placed on probation in general sessions court, if I don't follow the terms of my probation, a violation warrant will be issued, and I will go back in front of the same judge who put me on probation. Those are the basic in-court tasks that the judges in general sessions court do. And again, what we're talking about is a very high volume of cases. Those judges, as I mentioned, also supervise the magistrates who issue arrest warrants and set bail. And so one of the main responsibilities that they also have is reviewing bail for individuals who are still in jail within a few days after bail is set. If people haven't been able to pay their bail or to get out of custody, their defense lawyer can ask the judge to conduct a bail hearing. And it would then be the general sessions judge who is deciding whether or not the bail and conditions of release are appropriate or should be changed. The other special thing about general sessions court is that they rotate. So the 11 judges are on a rotation where one week they'll be in a criminal courtroom, and then the next week they'll be in a civil courtroom. And then the week after that, they may be on a traffic docket. And that's, so they kind of they all don't hold their same caseload, which makes it a little more difficult if you're trying to evaluate how a judge practices, like what a judge does and the outcome for a particular judge in their case. It can be a little challenging with how our general sessions court works, because one day I'm in a criminal docket today, but next week that case is going to be left to another judge because I've moved on to a civil docket. So that's general sessions court in a really short period of time. Juvenile court, as I mentioned, it's off to the side. Juvenile court has broad authority over pretty much all things legal related to children. So foster care, dependent and neglected children, And then, of course, juvenile delinquency charges. We don't call them crimes. We're talking about young people. Young people are not charged with crimes. They are alleged to be delinquent. So if you've heard the phrase juvenile delinquent, that's where it comes from. And so juvenile court and the juvenile court judge has jurisdiction over children who are alleged to be delinquent. That could mean that they have done something, they've been charged with doing something that is a crime, like theft, but it could also mean that they've been charged with something that what we call a status offense. That might be like out after curfew. It's something that only gets a kid in trouble and doesn't get an adult in trouble, if that makes sense. So maybe not going to, like being underage in possession of alcohol underage. That's going to get 18 to 21 in trouble. Possession of tobacco is a good example of another status offense. The last thing about juvenile court that's important, I think, is that the district attorney's office makes decisions about who they will seek to try as an adult. So it's not that a juvenile court judge makes decisions about who will be tried as an adult or not. Ultimately, she will have to decide as a decider whether or not to send a child who's charged with a serious offense to adult court for trial as an adult. But that process begins and is initiated by the district attorney's office deciding that they want to pursue that. If the district attorney never decides to try a child as an adult, then it will never happen. The judge's role in that is simply deciding on the state's request to try a child as an adult. Criminal court, when I say it funnels down, right, I'll give you in 2019, whereas General Sessions Court handled somewhere in the vicinity of 36,000 criminal defendants. In criminal court, it was 6,690 in the same year. So you've got 30,000 in General Sessions Court and you have 6,700 in criminal court. And roughly 1/3 of those cases in criminal court were probation violations. So what you see in criminal court are people charged with pretty much all felony offenses. The judges do not share courtrooms. They don't rotate courts. They have an assigned courtroom with assigned cases. And so all of their cases stay with them, which makes it much easier to kind of look at each of those judges' track records across time with their cases. Those judges in criminal court do very similar things to the judges in General Sessions Court. They take a lot of guilty pleas. They also conduct bail hearings. And they can do bench trials as well, a trial where they decide if the defendant is guilty or not guilty. They conduct violation hearing. The things that they do that General Sessions judges typically don't are they conduct jury trials. So they preside over jury trials. They also do a lot of evidentiary hearings or legal hearings around evidence. So if I believe the police illegally stopped me and they got evidence that shouldn't be allowed to be used against me, I have that hearing in criminal court. If I think the police interrogated me illegally, I would have a hearing on that in criminal court and ask the judge not to let them use my statements against me. So that's the basic differences between the three levels of court. The thing I want to talk a little bit more about now is kind of, regardless of which level of court you're in, General Sessions, juvenile, criminal court, what's your job as a judge? And I want to start with the thing that I think all of us think about, which is the idea of being a neutral decider. And neutral is a really important word. Judges are supposed to be neutral, right? They're not supposed to favor the defense. They're not supposed to favor the state. They're just supposed to be neutral. This is one of those things that I want to encourage us all to think about as the theory versus the reality. I think judges can try very hard to be neutral, but I also believe that we all bring our own life experiences, perspectives, attitudes, values into the roles that we fill. And so I think we miss something if we just presume that judges are these neutral, like, deciders who don't have life experiences that influence them. If you've heard about the concept of unconscious biases that we all have, right? I think there's a lot of talk about that in policing, but I would suggest to all of you to be thinking about how we have our own biases, both conscious and unconscious, but so does everybody else working in the court system. And I think it's important for us to talk about that and recognize it and work on figuring out how are those things influencing us, and how can we, by acknowledging them, put measures in place to try to counteract that as much as we can. So judges, they're deciding things. They decide the facts. When there's a hearing on whether or not the police illegally interrogated me, they're going to hear from a police officer who describes what happened. They're going to hear from me when I describe what happened. And the judge is going to decide what they believe actually happened. So then they know that they've made their decision about what facts. Then factual and interpret the law that exists, that on how they think the facts as they find them apply to the law as they interpret the law, they make a decision and they decide the outcome of the dispute. It might be, I find you guilty of the crime or not guilty. At the beginning of a case, it could very well be in the same situation. I'm deciding, do I think you should get out of jail pre-trial? Do I think you should have to pay bail? Or do I think you will come back if I let you out without having to pay anything? They may be deciding an issue about an illegal search, or they may be deciding that I pled guilty and now they have to determine what's the appropriate sentence for me. In deciding these things, judges exercise broad discretion and power. And I think when we talk about the impact that judges have on our lives and on our community, it is in this broad discretion and power where we see that. The second role that judges fill is as an administrator, right? So they have all these cases assigned to them, and they have to figure out how they're going to manage all of those cases. So they set their court dockets. When am I going to hear all these cases? In criminal court, the judges do jury trials on Mondays, and that's when they start. And by Wednesday, they have a certain type of case they're going to hear. On Thursday, that's what we call discussion date, which is the date where there's a lot of pleas. And then on Fridays, a lot of judges conduct hearings on Friday. So each judge has their own way of operating their court to be both, and the pressures they're looking at are efficiency and fairness. Make sense? They want their courts to be efficient, but you also have to be fair. You can't expect a lawyer or a defendant to be ready for a jury trial 2 weeks after they were arrested. They need time to get acquainted. So there's this tension between efficiency and fairness. So they got to manage those cases. They have to manage the court participants. So when they're conducting their court, they need people to be quiet so that they can hear. They don't need outbursts in their courtroom. They set the rules for what people can wear in their courtroom and who can talk in their courtroom and when they can talk. So they are in control of their courtroom. The other big responsibility they have in Tennessee as administrators is in the appointment of defense counsel and payment of fee claims. So if you get a public defender to represent you, the judge really isn't involved beyond just appointing the public defender. And then the public defender is the supervisor of all of those defense lawyers. And there were 40 some when I was there. If you don't get a public defender and you haven't hired a lawyer, then the judge who's hearing your case picks your lawyer for you and assigns that lawyer. And each judge in Davidson County has their own set of lawyers that they like to appoint. Those lawyers are not supervised beyond that. They are paid at a very low rate with caps on their compensation, with no minimum standards or criteria to do this work, and really nobody's supervising them. So I will say that that is a recipe for disaster. And I will say that judges, because they are the only administrator of that system, I would say have a particularly special responsibility to address problems in the appointed counsel system. The last thing I'll talk about is judges as public servants, right? We go to courtrooms and we're all there we may be a participant, we may be a defendant, we may be a victim, we may be a witness, we may be an observer. But judges serve all of us. And so I see their role as a public servant to treat all court participants and observers with respect, to avoid conflicts of interest and disclose them when they exist, to say, hey, I have a bias in this case. Let me tell you what it is and why I can't sit on this case. They have to be accountable and honest and available to answer questions and be, I think, transparent about what's happening in their courtroom, and to be good stewards of public resources. So the questions that I would encourage you all to think about starting with a judge candidate is these two questions. Why are you a judge? And what does criminal justice mean to you? Because what I believe is that the values that people bring to this role will tell you a lot about how they will decide things, how they will administer things, and how they view their role as a public servant. And really, that's what justice is about, right? So when we talk about criminal justice, I think about it in these 6 different frameworks. And they're kind of, you might see on a continuum, right? So one meaning of justice is retribution. It's the basic, to take a biblical concept, eye for an eye. You take from me, I'll take from you. You hurt me, I'll hurt you. That's retributive justice. It is what the death penalty is about. Punishment. So I can believe that punishment is that somebody should suffer negative consequences for breaking the law. Punishment could be a fine, it can be jail, it can be prison, it can be any sort of restriction on my freedom. But justice for many people is about punishment. Deterrence. I may not necessarily be interested in punishing you, but I don't want other people breaking the same law you did, and I don't want you to do it again. And so I'm going to take action. Really, my motivation is to make an example of you for others and for yourself, and discourage you from doing this again, and discourage anyone else from doing it again. That's my goal. For others, justice may mean rehabilitation, or I always say habilitation too, because I think a lot of people who wind up in the criminal legal system were so disadvantaged from the beginning of their lives that they were never in a good place. So to say that we rehabilitate people implies that they were already in a good place. But basically, this is about, for me, justice means fixing what caused the behavior to prevent it from happening again, right? I'm not going to deter by punishment, but I'm going to deter by fixing the problem so that the behavior doesn't happen again. Then there's restoration and healing. Restorative justice is really this model where we work to identify what harm was caused, who's responsible for it, why it happened, and how do we make it better so that it doesn't happen again. And then the last one I would say is forgiveness and mercy, where we don't worry anything at all about what the person did, and to use another biblical, we turn the other cheek, right? We're not concerned with how we deal with the other. We're just saying, for us, we're going to walk away. The reason I say you start with this question is because then I think the follow-up question is the really important one, which is to ask people who are running for judge or who is a judge, how does your philosophy on justice show up in the decisions you make? How does it show up in how you run your court and how you view your role as a judge? And so the last thing I want to share with you is specific issues that you can think about those concepts in the context of. Issues that are going on in the criminal legal system in Nashville right now, in many other places, that I think are issues you will want to talk to candidates about and get their position on them. And the first and foremost is, who's in our jails and why are they there and how much is it costing us? And what good is coming of having people in jail to either them or their families and to us? And how much public safety are we really producing from that, right? So jails is a big issue. And I'll tell you, the people in our jails generally fall into like these categories. There are roughly half of the people in the Davidson County Jail today are there because they're awaiting trial. They haven't been convicted of anything. They're just waiting for their trial. I have a client who is waiting there, who has been waiting there for 3.5 years for his trial. And he's now set in April of next year. You also have individuals who are there who've been convicted of crimes and they are serving a sentence of incarceration. That's actually a pretty small share of the people who are in custody. And then you have people who have probation violations. So they got an alternative sentence. A judge or a DA agreed to put them out on probation, and then they allegedly did something to violate their probation, and now they're waiting in jail, waiting to see what's going to happen to them. So these are who is in our jails and our cages. I think it's important to weigh theory and reality. Jail is kind of a nice word for saying we've put a person in a cage. I don't talk a lot about prisons here. That's kind of outside the scope of things, but we do have people who go through the criminal legal system who are sent off to prison. And they go there if they have a sentence of 6 years, of more than 6 years. So issues around why are we holding people in jail pre-trial? Can we reduce those numbers? How does a judge decide who to keep in jail pre-trial and who to let out? How does a judge decide that somebody should have to pay money to get out of jail? What if the person doesn't have any money? And do we really know if money helps address the issues related to bail, which are, do they come back to court and are they going to pose a risk to the community and safety? The second thing I would ask you to think about are racial and ethnic disparities and to really talk to people about these questions. Are judges and other court actors treating people in our courts equitably and fairly, regardless of race or ethnicity? If your instincts tell you no, your instincts are good. And it's hard getting data around this, but there's some specific data I can share with you that I think is eye-opening, right? 50% of the people arrested in Nashville are African American. The population of Nashville is not 50% African American. So 50% of the people arrested are African American. 60% of the people in our jail are African American. So somehow we go from 50% arrested to 60% in jail. That percentage is the same today as it was 10 years ago. So we have not made any progress on reducing the disparity in who is in our jail. We recently got a report on bail outcomes. And what that report shows is that white people are released more frequently on ROR, meaning they don't have to pay any bail, or on pretrial release, meaning they're released under the supervision of the sheriff's office without having to pay bail. White people are released at a higher percentage than Black people. So in 2020, white people were released on pretrial release 25.6% of the time. So 1 in every 4 white people was released on pretrial release. For Black people, that was 17.5%. So even as something very early on, we are seeing a huge disparity. White people were released as without having to do anything on their own recognizance at a rate of 4.3%, whereas African Americans were released on their own recognizance at 2.3%. So there are significant disparities in just that data point alone. Class and wealth disparities are significant in our criminal legal system. And so one question to think about is, are judges removing disadvantages that are caused by poverty, or are they reinforcing them in the decisions that they make and in their administration of the system? The biggest issues here that I would point to are the money bail issue, and how many people are stuck in jail. I think the average daily population in October, the average number of people in jail on bails they couldn't afford to pay was 750 in the month of October. 750 people charged with felonies. And they're there because they can't afford to pay a bail a lot of the time. How many people are we putting on electronic monitoring? And what's the expense associated with an ankle monitor that you have to pay a daily fee for? Quality of representation, legal representation issues exist. What are judges doing to ensure that people who can't afford to hire a lawyer are getting effective representation? There are serious, serious problems with that in Tennessee. How are they handling fines and court costs once a person is convicted? Time of the disposition, the time of the case is resolved, are they asking, can you afford to pay this $1,500 fine and court costs? If you can't, do we need to deal with that today? Or am I going to make you, or do I look at fine as part of punishment? And you just got to deal with it. Doesn't matter that you don't have money. You'll have to suffer having your driver's license suspended, and maybe go on a payment plan, and maybe you won't be able to pay for something else you need. So how are judges dealing with these issues related to class and wealth disparities? How do judges deal with procedural justice issues, which is really about how people perceive the fairness or unfairness of the court system? And I suggest to you that this really varies widely, whether you're part of what we call the in-group or the out-group. Are you the part of the majority? Are you a white person who has gone to court with a lawyer who you hired charged with a property crime? And how is your perception of how you are treated different than how somebody who is from an historically oppressed community and still oppressed community? If you're an African-American person who can't afford to hire a lawyer, who's lived in the South your whole life and understands the criminal legal system as a tool of oppression, because that's what your ancestors experienced, and it is how you have experienced the system. How do you perceive how you're treated in that court system? Do you see judges who look like you, who come from places like you? Do you see prosecutors and defense lawyers? So procedural justice issues are really important in asking judges how they deal with that reality, if they deal with it. And then lastly, I think resources and efficiency. I won't get into all the data here. There'll be places you can find that, but there has been a substantial decrease over the last 5 years in the workload that goes through our court system. And so one question that I think we should be asking is, do we still need 11 General Sessions judges for the workload that is currently going through General Sessions Court? Are the courts operated in an efficient way? And what are we getting for our investment in all of this criminal legal system? Are people better? Are we safer? Do people come off probation and they're better off? We invest millions and millions of dollars in the criminal legal system every year in Nashville. And I think the questions we need to be asking judges is, are you our best investment? Or are there other things we can invest in that would produce greater public safety? So I want to end with things you can do. I'll put this up there and then we can take questions. You can go watch court. You can check out, there's a Nashville Community Court Watch you can find on Facebook and Twitter to get connected. If you want to get connected, you can also reach out to us at CJI. Court watching is the most enlightening thing you can do to start to understand what happens in these courtrooms in Davidson County. It's hard to get to 18 different judges' courtrooms, though. So you can attend candidate forums and listen for the questions that get asked and the answers provided. Talk to people who trust who work in the courts. I guarantee you they're going to have opinions about the candidates and the judges. Ask questions yourself of candidates. If you're at a forum, a lot of these things are oftentimes, or at a fundraiser, a lot of these things can just be popularity contests. But if you're armed with good questions, ask those questions and see how you feel about the answers you get. And then reading. There's a lot of reports available out there on these issues that we've talked about: pretrial detention and money bail, and fines and fees, and racial disparities in the court system. Educating yourself on what those issues are. We will, by January, I expect CJI will have a page on our website where you can get a lot of reports related to Nashville, and also a lot of the data reports related to courts if you're interested in looking at that. So check back with us at www.cjinashville.org in January. With that, I'm going to stop the share and take questions.
I have a question. I'm Ralph Gordon. You've made reference to the bail system and the inequalities. Have you noticed the disparity in the different crimes that are committed, particularly here in Davidson County, and how the bail is set by the judges?
So, yes. So bail varies based, I think the number one factor that influences how much bail is set at when we're talking about cash bails is the charged offense. So not surprisingly, homicide may carry a higher bail. The reality, however, is that what bail is designed to do is two things: ensure presence in court and protect public safety. It also is designed to honor the presumption of innocence that we are all supposed to have. So even I might be charged with a homicide, but I might be not guilty. That happens. And I could be charged with a whole range of offenses, but the job that the judge is supposed to be doing is assessing, am I likely to return to court? And am I a risk to the public? And is the only thing that we can do to mitigate or to help that risk is keep somebody locked up pre-trial. If you're not, without pre-trial liberty, you really are punished before you're convicted of anything.
Is there not a set of rules that you go by to determine the amount of bail?
There's not a set of rules to determine the amount of bail. There's a statute with factors that a judge is supposed to consider about whether or not to release somebody without having to pay bail. But if the judge decides that they believe a monetary bail condition is required, the only rule is the judge should set it as low as necessary to ensure their appearance in court and protect public safety. That's it. And so what we find in the amounts of bails vary widely depending upon who the judge is and depending on so many different factors without much rhyme or reason.
Thank you.
Dawn, the only thing I would have added to your list of what things we can do, I would add that we should be sure that we vote for our judges. We have a low record of turnout for people who vote in judicial elections, and we need to vote, get others to vote, and vote with intention.
And there's a question in the chat about mental health court. I didn't dive into the treatment courts and the specialty courts that exist in general sessions and criminal court, but they are there. One of the 11 general sessions judges handles each of them. So Judge Blackburn is over mental health court and the veterans court. Judge Robinson handles recovery court. Judge Bell has legacy court. There's multiple different treatment courts. And how people get referred to those is a product of their defense lawyer and the prosecutor. And so as you might imagine, there's a lot of biases that frankly go into that. Resources for Murray County, I cannot tell you. Sorry, I don't know Murray County.
So Dawn, you had mentioned that in general sessions court, there are 5 magistrates and 10 to 12 part-time magistrates. And they function under the supervision of the general sessions judges. And they also set initial bail for all arrested offenses. What level of supervision do the general sessions judges actually implement over the magistrate judges?
Having never been like privy to those conversations myself, I have a sense that they set policies for those general sessions, for those magistrates. So for instance, there is a written policy on who the magistrates can authorize to be released through the pretrial release program. And so they review of the judge. If somebody complains, they would take a review of that. But beyond that, I don't really know that there's much supervision at all.
Dan, I notice you're on the call here. You sat in that spot. Can you offer any clarification on that?
On the supervision of night court commissioners?
Correct.
Well, there's a committee of judges that, out of the general session judges, that actually is responsible for that. And they do meet on a regular basis. I actually was asked to speak not long ago to the incoming magistrates on mental health issues, particularly committal issues. So they do meet regularly. I can't, since I've been off the bench a few years, I can't tell you specifically what happens, but they are supervised by this committee. And as Dawn knows, and Erwin, probably some of the others, on occasion there are complaints that are issued about a magistrate and how they're handling things, and those are dealt with every time. So there is some supervision that I'm speaking from years ago, but there was some supervision.
Great, thanks a lot, Dan.
Yeah, sure.
I'm putting in the chat, Sylvia asked about how many judges are running unopposed. So right now, to my knowledge, 5 of the 6 criminal court judges are currently unopposed. Cheryl Blackburn in Division 3 has Kyle Parks is running in that seat. 2 of the 11 general sessions judges have announced they're retiring. That's Judge Higgins and Judge Mondelli. And lawyers are running for those open seats. I know of at least, I think there's one, right now, I think there's only one general sessions judge who is running for re-election, who I've heard has opposition. And of course, I don't think anybody's announced that they're running against Sheila Calloway, who's our court judge yet. So the qualifying deadline for those races is in February.
Dawn, could you explain the role of the sheriff in the sheriff's department as opposed to what responsibility?
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, if you're riding down the road and you see a sheriff's deputy car next to you, you can speed right on by them because they have no law enforcement authority. The sheriff in Davidson County runs the jail. They also serve civil process. So if you're getting sued civilly, they will come out to your house and sue you with civil process. They provide security at the courthouse, and they do booking for people being booked in. But they do not have police powers. They do not have law enforcement power. That is exclusively held by the police in Davidson County. It's different in other places, so don't go speeding by the Cheatham County Sheriff. But in Davidson County, the sheriff just runs the jails and has no law enforcement authority.
Could you say something about why so few of the positions are contested, and taking the long view, is that something that is really important for us to try and change? And is that usual, or is this?
It's very typical. And if you just got to understand a little bit about the practice of law to know why. So if I'm a lawyer who practices in Nashville's courts, right? I might be, that's who your candidacy is going to come from. You got to be a lawyer to run for judge. And if I'm running, odds are I practice in that court, right? I'm a lawyer. Well, there is a heavy, heavy disincentive for a lawyer to run against an incumbent sitting judge. Not lawyer worry that that judge will not be good to me or my clients. All the other judges on the bench will close ranks with that judge, and they all support each other. And so not only will I suffer if I go into that judge's courtroom, but all the other judges may not be nice to me. It's very hard to fundraise because your natural fundraising pool is other lawyers, and other lawyers are going to be hesitant to support you and give you money to run against a judge who is sitting there, because they have to practice in front of that judge for the next year while you're running. It is a significant problem, I would say, but a very common one. In places where judges are elected, it's a very common one. But I don't know. I guess these elections have been partisan for as long as I remember. And in Nashville, everybody runs as a Democrat. So the election cycle, right? The qualifying deadline is February. The primary election will be in very early May. And that decides the races, because even though the general election is in August, there typically are not Republican candidates on the ballot. And so the primary elections are what decide these races. And there's often very low voter turnout for these races. So people get elected into these judicial roles with 8-year terms with 8,000 votes. I know we're past time. I'll answer other questions, but.
Dawn, I was just wondering if maybe you could say a little bit about Court Watch and how people can get, I know you said they could go on the website, but there's a training piece that just so people kind of know what's involved?
Yeah, so there's been several attempts and efforts at getting organized court watching going here in Nashville. There's currently an effort that you can find on Facebook and on Twitter that's called Nashville Community Court Watch. So if you go on for it, you can like it and follow it. Probably the easiest way, if you really truly want to go and watch court, is to shoot us an email at CJI. Erica Duggan, who's paralegal with us, is working with Raheem Buford, who many of you know, and they're sort of organizing that work right now. But that's the best way, I think, if you want to get involved in the work or in the work of going to watch court. They'll do a training, kind of give you a glossary, give you a little bit more information than I gave you today about what to look for in the courtroom. I know somebody asked
jump in
chat.
here. I know I took Pat went to court with me a number of times, and I had a lot of people. I had a number of people just call me, and I know Pat did. And so if you know a judge, or even if you don't, they're happy for you to, most of them, I would think, because they're political animals too. And you know, they'll welcome you in. We welcomed in groups of students and whatever. So it's not, I know it's intimidating for people, but you know, it can be done fairly easily. And the nice thing, if you do contact somebody, a judge or someone down there, that they'll tell you what's going to happen. So don't be afraid to do that either. And as I said, I think most would be most courteous. I think all would be. So I loved having people come in. Frankly, I think it's a great way to learn how things operate.
So to sort of tie this together, one of the efforts that many of us are going to be engaged in over the next couple of months, primarily through NOAA and other groups, is to, first of all, try to educate the public, ourselves, about the importance of the election of general sessions and criminal court judges. Generally speaking, when I'm practicing as a lawyer, and Dan probably gets the same thing, elections come up for judges and people say, well, who are these people and who should I vote for? And the reason for that is that we don't know anything about what they do and how important they are. So there are at least 3 things that are going to be going on over the next 3 months that we hope that you will all participate in and bring in your friends and family about it. First, there is a survey that has been generated by a number of us who are concerned about the election of these judges, these criminal court and general sessions judges. That we would encourage you to complete that survey if you haven't already done so, and you should receive an email with that survey sometime in the next few days. Secondly, in January, perhaps in November, there'll be additional public education programs similar to the one we did today, again, to educate people about the importance of general sessions judges and criminal court judges as it impacts issues of mass incarceration and fairness in our criminal courts. In March, we plan to conduct, again, through NOAA and other organizations, candidate forums for the elected or for the contested general sessions and criminal court races. Right now, we understand it to be 4, 3 in general sessions and 1 in criminal court. There may be more because, as Dawn pointed out, the deadline for announcing to be a candidate in any of these races is in the end of February. And then, of course, there's Election Day in May. And as I pointed out in the chat, generally speaking, in these primary elections that are held in May, usually they're low turnout elections, which means maybe 30 or 35,000 people vote, which means that 15,000 people or more can elect who will be our judges in general sessions and criminal court for the next 8 years. These are critical positions, and to the extent that we can educate ourselves about not only what they do, but those which express attitudes and positions that are consistent with what we believe should be happening in our general sessions criminal court judges, you can have significant impact in who those people are who are elected. So we encourage you to participate in the public education programs, in the candidate forums. We encourage you to distribute information to your friends and family about the candidates, and get out to vote next May.
The only thing I would add, Erwin, is I'd encourage everyone on this call, if you're not a member yet, to join our social justice roundtable, and we'll include that link in the email we send out. That will be one way to be in touch with forums and other educational programs. We'll keep our membership alerted to those.
Thank you so much, Dawn. All our congregations are members of NOAA, so let's hope we can all participate in that.
And we would encourage your membership in NOAA as well.
Well, thank you all so much for bearing with me through that hour.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dawn.
It was
Take
great.
care.
Thank you, Dawn. Great job.
Thank you.
Maybe we need a field trip to a court one night together as a community.
Well, we could do that.
Yeah, I think it might be interesting.
I think it might freak out the magistrates.
So are we, as a person off the street, are we able to walk in, or do we need the invitation and knowledge of the judge to be in his or her courtroom?
No, you can walk in to the night court commission. The magistrate is a special place in the criminal justice center, and I think, as Dawn and Dan pointed out, you're free to go to court anytime to watch. In terms of doing that in a knowledgeable way, to the extent that you might want to go on the website of the Nashville Community Bail Fund. I think they or it will be organizing court watch programs, which would be probably the best way for you to go about doing that.
Can I also suggest something? On another side of this, a lot of people are called to be on juries, and a lot of people I know try to get out of it. I would suggest and implore people to serve on juries when you're called, because you need to be there with your knowledge and your wisdom and understanding to serve on these juries. They're very important. So I would suggest that that's another angle and another thing that should be encouraged.
Nancy, sometimes the court officer, if you go into a courtroom, the court officer that stands at the door will ask you who you are or why you're there, but you can just say, I'm just a citizen interested in watching, and they'll let you in.
Thanks, Pat.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. I love our collaborations. I really do.
Very
Got a lot
good.
more to collaborate on, Renee.
Yes,
Thank
more of
you.
this. All right. Take care,
Okay,
guys.
so end this down. Okay, guys, be well.
Question, Erwin?
All right. Bye, Pat. Good to see you.
You too.
Yeah,
Bye.
Okay.
Pat, we miss you, Pat.
Yeah.
Thank
Miss
you.
you.
Erwin, Sam had a question for you.
Is there some one of the organizations that sort of is keeps an eye on how the judges, how sensitive or insensitive the judges are to our concerns?
Is there an organization?
Yes, I mean, does no one? I mean, are there several organizations? I guess.
No, the sensitivity of the public to the judges takes place on election day.
So,
As Dawn pointed out, the only group that really evaluates judges, other than on election day, is the Nashville Bar Association. Will have a poll that is limited to lawyers. And basically that poll will be an assessment of, it's essentially a popularity contest among lawyers.
okay.
They have three categories: highly qualified, qualified, or not qualified. It doesn't provide you with any information about how they administer justice, how they administer their courts, or really any useful information other than how many people know who that person is and how effective has the lawyer been in mobilizing his or her friends to tell people to vote for him. So when you see the Nashville Bar Association judges poll, understand what you're seeing.
Right.
It's nothing substantive.
How do we get something substantive, I guess is my question.
Well, that's difficult. And you know, I'm not really aware of any places that have an effective mechanism for the evaluation of state court or local judges, other than what happens on election day, or other than you know, municipalities that have a court watch program. Court watch programs are effective in impacting judges' behavior. Memphis has a very robust court watch program, and they publicize their information and their reviews on a blog, and that blog gets judges' attention, especially when they get negative comments.
Yeah, that's
So
something to think about. That's for
yeah,
sure.
it is something to think about. And again, there have been some efforts to organize a court watch program in Davidson County, and I'm really not fully aware of what the status of that is right now.
I mean, if we could identify which judges are particularly insensitive to our concerns, I mean, to the concerns of groups like ours, then we could, if we could figure that out, then we could stand up people against them.
Well, that's one of the things that, you know, that Avi and I and others have been working on, We intend to have these candidate forums and candidate interviews to assess their sensitivity to the issues that Dawn raised.
Right.
Then when it gets around election time, to publicize as far as we can who we think these the best candidates are.
Right.
Some of the organizations we're working with in that effort are 501c3 organizations who can't do that. Avi and I are not a 501c3 organization.
Sam, part of our role is to just talk to our neighbors and friends and get people to vote and share what we think are the most judicious.
So, and the same thing with NOAA. NOAA cannot endorse candidates. NOAA can
just educate.
So we intend to take it a step further and provide substantive information, at least based on what we have observed and what others who are of the same ilk but are not organization related know. So watch out for that, in March and April.
Hey, Erwin, have you ever tried to rally the people who these judges affect the most and get them out to vote? Not, just try it anyway.
Well, that's really the effort here, Linda. I mean, through the work of NOAA in terms of educating people about the importance that we're working with other organizations who function or work in the impacted communities, is to get that information out there so people, will understand the impact that these judges have on what happens to them if they happen to get arrested.
Exactly. Yeah.
But that's, it's a hard push. It's difficult because people don't think about, what impact judges have. They don't want to worry about it.
But how about, we didn't talk about the Chancery Court at all in this, right?
We did not. We did not. And that's,
that's important as well, don't you think, in terms of legislation that comes out of the state and the Metro Council? And things like early voting and mail-in voting, that was very much decided in the Chancery Court.
Well, unfortunately, our legislature fixed that problem from their perspective. And that is that now, if there are significant cases of constitutional import, those cases will no longer be decided by the Davidson County Chancery Courts. They will now have specially appointed judges who will participate with a Davidson County chancellor. So you are right. In the past, all those cases would have been decided in Davidson County by Davidson County judges. That's no longer to be the case going forward.
That's scary.
It is
Sam,
scary.
just to follow up on your question, once any one of us or a group of us think we have something to say to others about the quality of those running for office, we need to share that with each other and our friends and neighbors, and email works. And given the number of people that show up, it would not take a large group to mass an effort that could influence the outcome of the election.
Yeah.
Well, we need to know who those people are you're emailing. So like, we don't know anybody in this group. I mean, we don't have their email, so we couldn't let them know. So,
well, we're going to get something out to people, and then to whatever extent they get out to those they know, in turn would be helpful.
You're generating this survey, correct?
Right. Well, the survey is already out there. We'll get it to everyone who participated in this call today.
Great. That'll be a good start.
Okay.
I'm going to get off.
Social media. That's the way to do it.
Yeah.
I
Thank
think
you, Erwin.
Will lawyers
Thanks,
speak out against the
Renee.
judge?
What's that, Renee?
I thought that Dawn made an excellent point, though. Will lawyers who are practicing in these courts speak out against the judge who they think is inefficient?
Well, and I'll give you a perfect example of that. There is one General Sessions judge who's up for re-election this year who had opposition 8 years ago. And based on information that I got from talking to defense attorneys, once she had opposition, she has in fact turned to be, less friendly towards defense attorneys than she was previously.
Hmm.
So
The club.
that's just, it's just inside baseball. And you got to understand that general sessions judges are not there for the benefit of lawyers. They're there for the benefit, of the community at large.
Inside politics.
You got it. Anyway, good seeing everybody.
Thank you.
Bye,
care.
thank you.
See
Thank
you
you.
later. Bye-bye.